society. So, aside from those structural stressors, there are differences in African American women that are not necessarily seen in other racial groups. And I won't say that they're completely unique to African American women, but I will say that these differences may add to the group of things that increase their risk for being unhealthy. And one of those differences is called epigenetics or epigenetics. This word epi, the piece of the word epigenetics, the part epi refers to anything that's in the environment, or epi means around or surrounding. Okay, so epi, environment, genetics refers to the relationship of the environment to our genetics. So why is that important, or why is that even something that I might want to think about when I think about stress? Well, have you ever heard of the fat gene? Okay, the fat gene refers to um, this this relationship that Black people have to um, when they lived in Africa. Okay, when they lived in Africa, when Black people were living in Africa primarily and not necessarily all around other places in the United States. In other words, before they were brought to the United States as slaves, when Black people were living in Africa, they would live in societies called agrarian societies or agricultural societies, where pretty much they farmed the land and they lived off of the land and the food that was provided by the land. Okay, so occasionally they would suffer or deal with or have to endure food shortages. All right, and what does that mean? There would be times when the harvest was low, or perhaps they lived in societies where they had fish, but perhaps not a lot of access to meats, or lots of high protein diets, or lots of calorie rich environments. Then they would have food shortages. And when you have a food shortage, you don't have access to good, healthy um, foods during famine. Okay, you hear about famine and people starving, that type of thing. All right, it happens occasionally. People get through those food shortages, but over time, their bodies learned how to respond to food shortages by developing the ability to hold on to calories when they did have food available. All right, so it's just a genetic change that happened over time, where Black people had a gene, and we called that the fat gene. And when that gene was working in people who were living in societies where there was famine, then they could get more bang for their buck when they ate a food, because that calories from that food would stick to their bodies longer. Okay, but when Black people were brought to the Americas, during the slave trade, their bodies began to experience different environments. Okay, epi meaning environment. However, their genetics were still set on the clock of thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago. Okay, so if our bodies have changed over time, or our environments have changed, but our DNA has not caught up to change with it, then it would make sense that you get some people who still have the fat gene or have inherited the fat gene from their forefathers. Okay, so stick with me here. If you have the fat gene and you now live in a society where there's plenty of calories available, then what do you think is going to happen when you eat high fat foods? Well, I can tell you that for the most part, you are going to, just like in Africa, when you eat a calorie, it's going to stick to you. Okay, it's going to be harder for you to rid yourself of those calories because your body isn't aware yet that you've been in America for, we've only been in America for about 400 or 500 years. That gene that holds on to calories has been in our bodies for a couple of thousand of years. So it takes a while for genes to change. It takes several generations. It takes probably about 5 or 6 or 7 generations. So you got people who've inherited the fat gene. It's a lot like the sickle cell gene. It's useful in Africa, but it's not useful in America. It's actually harmful. Okay. So epigenetics, the way the environment made it so that that's even another double whammy if you have a hard time losing weight, or if you have a lot of fat on your body because of the things that you've eaten in your lifetime. It's going to make it harder for you to be healthy. Other individual differences include the early childhood experiences of Black women. Black women have some challenges, or Black girls have challenges that they meet when they're children that not all other racial groups experience. Fatherlessness is one of them. Many girls experience that, and other traumas that they have to live through and get tough about. And we talk about when we as Black women are raising our children, or we're being raised by our parents, often we have to learn how to have a thick skin, how we have to learn how to be tough, and how we have to learn how to be resilient in the face of many stressors. So that's another difference that's very important in telling us how our body and our brain chemistry works. Identity. What do I mean by identity? I'm talking specifically about a characteristic called strong Black woman identity. So, Black women have had many different identities over time, and you've heard of many of these identities as expressed through music and theater and art, and um, you've seen it in magazines. You've seen a lot of different types of identities. Some are embraced by Black women, others are given to us by outside society. For example, the Jezebel or the Mammy um, identity. It's like the Oprah identity. People talk about having a large African American woman that you can talk to and tell your problems to, and who'll hug you and support you, that type of thing. There are a lot of identities that have been bestowed upon the Black woman. But one that we really relate to that works really well is the strong Black woman identity. Or does it work so well? It's been helpful in helping Black women to be resilient and to deal with many stressors, but it has not been helpful in helping us to be completely healthy. So the next category here is interpersonal differences. So, interpersonal is referring to the relationship that Black women have with other human beings, other people, other persons. So, those differences that I'm talking about refer to how Black women relate to other people or their relationships. All right, and how are they different? Well, for one thing, Black women have multiple family or caregiving roles. All right. And when it comes down to these roles, you see that often African American women are dealing with more than is realistic for them to handle. You may see often that Black women are managing their children's lives as well as the lives of their parents often. And they also have what we call non relational kin, or they have kinship networks that include people who may not be blood relatives. Okay, so we talk about play cousins, and play aunts, and that type of thing. But in essence, African American women, since back during slavery times, have always had the they've taken on the responsibility of other individuals even when they weren't members of their family, and they definitely, when it comes to the members of their family, feel especially connected and bonded and responsible for them. Okay, so that creates a situation where they're not just worried about themselves, but they're often worrying about other individuals. And do you remember when I talked in the earlier slide about worry and how that plays in on your impact for diabetes? Well, let's just say that when a person has a lot of family and caregiving roles, then they do worry a little bit more, okay? Um, Another elephant in the room when it comes to these caregiving roles is that Black women are often unpartnered. They are the most unpartnered subgroup in the United States. They often do not have the benefit of having a marriage partner or a life partner with whom they can share responsibilities and roles, in terms of things like child rearing, simple things that one can often take for granted, like getting the kids to extracurricular activities or having multiple children with multiple schedules and being able to have someone who can help out with those types of things. Or if one of the family members needs to work on a project, another family member or the other partner can help pick up the slack with making the meals or preparing the kids for school or for bed or that type of thing. So at the end of the day, they're taking on multiple roles and often without partners. Abuse and trauma history. Now, this doesn't just go for the individual and what she experiences as abuse, but also the collective of African American women over time, okay, and knowing that they have had this collective history of emotional abuse and physical abuse and sexual abuse. Now, I don't have to get too graphic here to tell you that that abuse has included being physically beat, that abuse has included being raped. Okay, so we're not just talking about what is happening in domestic violence situations, but we're talking about a long-term history of African American women as being seen as victims or being seen as people um, who you can abuse. So the history of slavery makes that plain, that they were physically beat and hit, but also that there was a lot of emotional abuse that would have come, as well as sexual abuse in the form of misogyny, which is when the slave owners would have sex with their slaves, all right, and from that bear children. So this idea of like the sexual and physical abuse, that weighs heavily on the minds of women, and in some cases when they aren't even aware, or it's weighing on them on a conscious level, it's still weighing on them on a subconscious level. They still have a knowledge that this is part of their history, that they have this trauma. Now, if I remove it from the collective history and make it more personal, Black women are the group known to report their abuse the least. They are least likely to report abuse that happens to them. And why do you think that is? I do believe, and the research will bear out, that it has a lot to do with their mistrust of our current legal justice system in America, and their desire to not make a bad thing worse by subjecting their men to the penal system. So at the end of the day, that trauma is just something that they wear on on their backs and in their minds. They just assume that and have to be resilient in dealing with the abuse that they may suffer. And discrimination. Now, you remember earlier when I talked about implicit bias, I wasn't talking about discrimination as much as I was talking about the thoughts that individuals have, or the bias or the preconceived notions that they might have in their mind. Discrimination is different from that, because discrimination refers to an individual not allowing another individual to do something merely on the basis of some factor like race or skin color, or how large their lips are, or how large their eyes are, or some other type of phenotypic or outside trait. Okay? So discrimination can be a problem in the lives of Black women, maybe not necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but a lot of Black women report having a history of some lifetime event of discrimination that plays in on their um, mental health and plays in on their awareness that they are considered second class citizens. So, do you see where I'm going with this? That the idea that one is part of some kind of second class status in their society, or the fact that one may think that she is being discriminated against, or one may actually be suffering through discrimination or instances of proven bias against them, that is stressful, that could be a stressful scenario that could build up over time. So